First, when looking at the QSR data that I gathered to find out what was the 5 biggest movers based on the data being shown. And the 5 that I came across were Chick-fil-A, Krispy Kreme, Raising Cane's, Shake Shack, and Whataburger. The main focus here showing on the data that I'm presenting right there is the average sales per unit, so per store that there was, how much, and this is with thousands represented of, so that's 6,100,000 per unit for Chick-fil-A and so forth going on. And this shows great respect to why these are the 5 that I felt were the best. There was also other data that would be explained, but mostly these ones were producing the most per unit. Also, they didn't have an alarming amount of saturation, and that they also were not declining on losing locations. They were actually increasing their numbers and yet still producing these higher numbers. And then, of course, there's the 5 on their way down. That's Baskin-Robbins, Subway, Papa Murphy's, Jimmy John's, and Church's Chicken. These ones were more so based on a combination of, as it's showing, to the change in the units. Even though some were gaining, they still weren't producing as well as others throughout the listing of the data. Some showing, especially like Papa Murphy's, there where they lost between the 2 years, and yet they still weren't producing a substantial amount of money per store that they were having. The main patterns in the data that were represented, showing off of course, initially the ranking system, and going through and showing off based on the sales they got, and that was for every single unit combined, and then each individual unit, how much they were producing, and the difference between how many there was stores previous to the current, well, from 2020 to 2021, showing off that in case of, especially with McDonald's, you can't completely trust that just because they lost several stores, they're still increasing their how much this McDonald's brand in general is making. And that probably is just coming down to simply they're oversaturated. There was probably several McDonald's too close to each other, where one was getting all the sales and the others were not, so therefore they closed them down. Things like that you have to take into consideration with the much bigger corporations as that. But then most of the data showing down also the comparisons of how much per unit versus how much the sales of all the units. Again, looking at the McDonald's where they had the largest amount total, but yet per store they're not going to be, just because there's so many stores. The main signs of moving that I was gathering was, of course, based upon the sum per unit, and then of course the sum of the change that occurred between the 2020 and 2021. And this graph here represents the ones that, of course, as I showed, the main 5 that I felt were movers were the first 5, where their numbers were, of course, on they were moving up rather than down, and they also were producing a high amount per store. What's the main factors for success when really looking at the thing? The signs of growth, again, going into it, are they creating more? Are they expanding? These are the kind of things that are showing more success in that brand. And then the profit per unit, going again, just because there's several, how much per the store are they actually making? Are they making a substantial amount, or is it because there's too many, so each one you make is less? A good example is Dunkin' Donuts. It's very profitable, but some of the studies show that because there's so many, that you're only going to make about 100,000 per unit, whereas you're looking at the Chick-fil-A, which is making a substantially more amount per unit. And then, of course, customer choice comes into play with this. Again, looking at for instance, the McDonald's, people know the brand, they understand what they're getting with the brand, so they'll go to that brand even though there's other choices that might be better. The big three was Chick-fil-A, Raising Cane's, and Shake Shack. These 3 had the most promise of all of them, and were yielding really good results, and they weren't super oversaturated. Which one would you want to invest in? I'm saying Shake Shack was, again, their total units, they're not that alarmingly huge yet, and yet their average sales per unit was a decently high. So you could easily take a Shake Shack, find an area or location that does not have Shake Shack essentially nearby, introduce it to that area, and there already is knowledge of Shake Shack, so bringing it to these places that aren't normally going to have it will just increase the sales. Your average would probably, well, you wouldn't even probably get the average, you'd probably get higher, or at least for the first bit, before establishing yourself in that zone. So that's looking into the financial side. Based on what Lederman said in Forbes magazine, he said that franchising fees usually vary between 20 and 50,000. So that's, and it could be more depending on the franchise that you're going for, but that money would be easily earned back with, again, looking at places. The weather condition, weather's not really going to affect Shake Shack. It could be cold or not. The only thing that you'll have to think about is distribution and timing. Geographical impact, again, bring it to a place that doesn't normally have it to bring out the best. And sanitation, normal food, always sanitize. And thanks for watching.